What is it like being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver part-time? In this video, I'm going to talk about everything you really need to know, the pros and the cons, all about being a rideshare driver, specifically part-time. Because I honestly find when most people watch my videos, when I get questions in person or whatever, just seeing the way people go about the ride-sharing landscape, when most people want to drive, it's part-time. They want to do it to make extra side cash. They have another gig they're focusing on. Here in LA, for example, a lot of people drive, and on the side, they do it just to make money because their main focus is acting, for example, right? It's a great part-time alternative. So jumping right into it, one, I want to start off by saying that honestly, and again, I have to stress, I have no affiliation with Uber or Lyft. They don't ask me to make this video or any of my videos. Might as well say that. But when it comes to Uber and Lyft, they really are, in my opinion, the best part-time jobs. The reason why is a few different things. One, by far the biggest, the flexible schedule. I think that's why most people start driving. When I first started driving, I started part-time, of course, and it was amazing. I could work on music and YouTube whenever I wanted, and then I could work on, I could work for Uber and Lyft whenever I wanted. You can turn on the app whenever you want. You can turn it off whenever you want. It's pretty awesome, I'm not gonna lie. And in addition to, and one big thing I've mentioned in a bunch of other videos, is if you think about it, when it comes to most jobs, and I've seen this a lot when I used to bartend, for example, that people would be like, oh man, I gotta pay off this bill. I'm trying to get more hours, but I can't. I can only get, I'm making this up, 30 hours a week, and there's no more hours. With Uber and Lyft, you never really have to worry about, in a sense, turning on the app and the app saying, sorry, we have no hours for you, or sorry, you can't work, or whatever. There is a limitation, I will say, of how much you can drive, but if you're driving part-time, you probably won't hit this, I believe, and it depends on the city and the state and the different rules, and this changes over time a little bit here and there, but overall, it's about max 12 hours a day, roughly, depends on where you are. But if you think about it, if you're driving part-time, let's say, a little bit here on a Friday and Saturday night, maybe a little bit after work, maybe a little bit Saturday and Sunday during the day, which is another great time to drive, you probably won't hit that at all. So the second big thing, I think, going along with the flexible schedule that makes it a great part-time alternative or a great part-time job is the fact that you don't really have to worry about not ever having hours. Another thing, third thing, is the barrier to entry. This is another big thing I've talked about, and this is why, again, I do think Uber and Lyft, and I will talk about the negatives, don't get me wrong, I do think Uber and Lyft, like I said, is truly the best part-time job because you don't really need any certifications. All you need at the basic starting point is a driver's license. That's it. Even if you don't have a car, you can rent one through Lyft and Uber. Now, I have to be honest and very transparent. If you are planning on only driving part-time, and that's what this video is focusing on, I do think that renting a car might not be the option. Maybe look into something else, for example, if you want me to be honest. The reason why is, as you can imagine, if you rent a car, you're starting in the hole. So if, let's say, you rent a car, on average, you look at anywhere between $200 and $300 a week, depending on the car and all these different factors, sometimes even more than $300 a week. I think like a Tesla could be a lot more, as you can imagine. So let's say an average of $250. Well, if you're driving part-time, but you have to spend $250 every week, or let's say $1,000 a month to rent that car, and you're only driving part-time, you might not even drive enough to even break even. You might even be losing money. So I will say, if you are planning on driving part-time, I do suggest make sure you have your own car. But going back to the barrier to entry, I'm a former accountant, and I've mentioned this before in other videos. Former accountant, I had to go to school. I had to apply to school, get into school, then get into the business school. Then I had to take all these classes. It was very rigorous, a lot of studying, a lot of hard work, and now I have a bachelor's degree in accounting. And a lot of accounting jobs, as you can imagine, require a bachelor's degree in accounting. However, when I've looked at a lot of those job postings on Indeed, Monster, LinkedIn Jobs, etc., a lot of them sometimes say, oh, you know what, $30 an hour, you need a bachelor's degree in accounting, you might not need your CPA, which is an accounting degree, an accounting certification, etc., etc. And then I think, wait a minute, with Uber and Lyft though, there's been some times, especially like say on a Friday and Saturday night, which is the peak and best times to drive, as a side note, the best times to drive morning and evening commutes, Friday and Saturday nights, I can make about $30 an hour, but I don't need to go to college. I don't need to go to a university or anything. I don't need a degree. I don't need a certification. I don't need to study all these classes and blah, 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 and spend years. I don't need to spend also, tens of thousands if not, depending on where you go, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a university or degree, I could just drive for Lyft and Uber with a driver's license and the car I already have anyway. So that's a big thing for number 3. It's not like if you want to, like, say, even if you want to be a bartender, like I said, when I used to be a bartender, you have to get like tip certified, you have to get all these different things. With Uber and Lyft, you don't really need any of that. It does depend on your location. I will say, being transparent though, like New York is probably the most strict one where you need like a TLC license by the Taxi and Limousine Commission. But for most 99.9% other areas, you can just drive with what you have. Signing up on Lyft and Uber, super quick, super easy. They will like run a background check on your driving history, a criminal background check. You have to submit your vehicle insurance, your registration, all that kind of stuff. But once you do, you're pretty much in, and it's pretty quick. And if you think about it, and it does depend on where you are. I've mentioned this a lot. Your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make. So in some cases, you can make a lot of money. In some cases, you can make not that much. But to just be able to hit a button in a flexible way, not worry about the hours, and just quickly start driving, and not need really anything else you need to buy or get. You don't have to take extra classes. It's pretty awesome that you can make potentially even like 25, 30 an hour. And depending on where you are, depending on the peaks, it can sometimes be more than that, which is awesome. And the fourth big positive I want to talk about, especially for a part-time job, because let's be blunt, if you're doing it part-time, you're probably not Daddy Warbucks, right? You're not loaded and you're like, oh, I'm just gonna do Lyft and Uber part-time. Although I have met drivers who are retired who are like, hey, I actually like doing this when I'm retired. It gets me out of the house. I make extra side cash. I can do whatever. So I will say that I do know some people like doing it just as almost something to do, so to speak, right? That's kind of fun. And I will say, driving is kind of fun. It's also kind of addicting because you look at your time differently, where you're like, all right, I can either stay in on this Friday night and just relax and watch Netflix, but I can also go out and instantly start making money. It's pretty awesome, right? But let's be honest, for most people driving, you want that money. Again, whether it's for a vacation coming up, to put into savings, to pay off a bill, to just do something with. The fourth positive aspect, in my opinion, is instant cash outs. This, I just gotta be honest, is, in my opinion, maybe the most, by far the most underrated part about Lyft and Uber, and maybe even the best part, maybe even more than the flexible schedule, is that you can make $20. I'm just making this up. 20, $30. Like say, you work for a couple hours, you make $40. You hit a button, and that money is instantly, and I mean instantly, in your bank account. I can't think of any other profession that is not only flexible, where you can work whenever you want, but then also has instant cash outs. So that means, like, let's say I check my email or my banking or whatever, and they say, oh my God, I forgot to pay this parking ticket. And if I don't pay it tomorrow, I might have to go to court, right? And let's say the parking ticket is $150, and let's say I'm tired of money. Let's say I'm like, oh shoot, I don't have that 150. I don't have that 150. I don't know what I'm gonna do. Boom, I just go out and drive, make 150, hit a button, boom. I now have that money instantly in my bank account, literally in seconds, and then I can pay that parking ticket, or I can pay that bill. This is what I used to do back in Boston when I was like unbelievably broke, is before I would go out for a Friday night, I would have to drive a little bit more. And back in the day when instant cash outs first came about, the minimum threshold, it doesn't exist now, but back in the day, you had to make at least $50. So you couldn't cash out if it was under 50. And I was like, okay, this is perfect, because what I'll do is I'll drive, make the amount of money that I typically will make, right? Cash out. That way I have the money in my bank account for bills, for expenses, but then I'll drive again, make 50, right? Go over that threshold and instantly cash out. That way on a Friday night when I go out, if let's say I do want to have some fun, if I want to be able to buy a couple of drinks at the bar, if I want to have money, ironically, for Ubers and Lyfts when going out, I have that money there. So that way I don't have to stress like, oh shoot, I don't want to eat into my savings. And especially back in the day, I was super tight on money. So it was kind of awesome, with all these things being said about Uber and Lyft, to be able to have that instant cash out option. Super helpful. And that's why, again, I love driving part-time. Now, on the flip side, you may be wondering, okay, Mark, that sounds great when it comes to driving part-time. You have everything from the flexible schedule, the low barrier to entry, and in a sense, especially if you're driving part-time, an unlimited amount of hours. You always have work on the table, and the instant cash outs. Sounds pretty great, but what's the catch? Now, of course, like anything, there's pros and cons to Uber and Lyft. The number one you're going to hear from a lot of drivers, and this one gets very tricky, and I've done full videos about this, is the pay. Now, throughout the years, and this is definitely true, you may hear this a lot from maybe friends, family, maybe even news articles, maybe even videos like this. It is true. Drivers get paid way less now than they ever did before. When I first started driving, there wasn't any talk about, oh man, Uber and Lyft doesn't pay that much. I was getting paid great money. Definitely not the case anymore. Granted, I started driving in Boston. Now I'm in LA right now. But I mean, there were some weeks in Boston where, especially when it would snow and the T would break down, the T, in case you didn't know, is the public transportation in Boston, which a lot of people take. I mean, I could make sometimes 50, 60 an hour rather consistently. If it was snowing and the surges were all over the place, it was pretty awesome, as you can imagine, to make that kind of money. Definitely not anymore. Now, like I said before, your location really is the number one factor of how much money you can make as a driver. And this is why I see a lot, like say on this channel, on online forums and everything, you see drivers debating. Of some drivers saying, Mark, I love driving for Lyft and Uber, like all the positives I just talked about. But then you see other drivers being like, no, I hate Lyft and Uber, it's the worst. I don't make that much money, and I don't know what to do because I'm driving a bunch and I'm getting paid less and less, and blah, 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 blah. Remember that because your location has such a big factor, that really is the determinant that both drivers are right. The driver makes a lot of money, and I've met drivers who make over 6 figures. I met a driver in Austin who made over 100K every year, and he's like, I love it. He goes, I drive 4 days a week, that's it. I drive for Uber only, and I hit all these bonuses and blah, blah, blah. I met drivers in Nashville who make insane money every day. Like, it depends on where you are. And unfortunately, if you are in a bad area, and there's been times where I talk to drivers and they're like, Mark, I'm not gonna lie, I live in a remote part of wherever, I barely make that much money at all. It's not worth it. So that is one thing to keep in mind, that when it comes to Uber and Lyft, your location really has a big impact. And if you're driving part-time, you might say like, oh, I want to drive part-time, but I live in a very small area. You might make, and I'm not making this up, I don't know, $5, $6 an hour. Maybe not worth it. Now, to some people, that might be, but remember also, too, you are an independent contractor. This is also another con to go along with that, where typically, it depends on where you are, the whole employee versus independent contractor debate has been brought up a lot, and it's changing over the years. Even by the time this video is posted, it might change depending on your city and state and everything, but typically, taxes do not get taken out, which means you have to owe taxes at the end of the year. So let's say if you make, and I'm going to make numbers very simple, let's say $12 an hour on average. Let's say that's your average hourly rate. I do suggest makes you save about 4 of those dollars in a savings account. Save about a third. So in a sense, yeah, you made $12 an hour, but really after taxes that you're gonna have to owe, you're looking about $8 to $9 an hour. To some people, that might not be worth it. To some people, they might say, you know what? I just don't think that's worth it at all for me because I now have to worry more about the accounting. You may have to hire a tax accountant. TurboTax, which by the way, I'm not the biggest fan of, TurboTax might not cut it, right? This is why you might need a tax accountant. You have to keep track of your receipts. You know, what did you spend in terms of gas? You can either write off gas or miles, in case you didn't know. Typically, miles are almost always going to be better, but you never know. But you have to keep track of things like gas. Your oil receipts, when you get an oil change, for example. If you get air in your tires, if you buy anything for Uber and Lyft, if you buy a phone mount, which you should have, an aux cord, other items to be an Uber Lyft driver. There's gonna be more maintenance, depreciation, wear and tear on your car. There's a lot of like little accounting things that pop up. And I will say, if you're driving part-time, they're not as intense as if you're driving full-time, right? Like, because you're just doing it on the side just for some side cash, but it can still be very tricky to kind of keep track of all these different things. But above anything, I think overall the biggest thing you hear a lot is the pay. That is by far the biggest con that you can hear from a lot of drivers, and it does make sense. Maybe to some people, if you can only make, like, say, $10 an hour on a Friday night, for example, let's say it's just really bad in your area, I'm going to be honest, I think I'd rather go out than make $10 an hour driving people around. Maybe you're better off finding, I know, ironically, a bartending gig, like I mentioned before, or maybe another job that you could do part-time. Yeah, maybe it's not as flexible. Maybe it doesn't have instant cash outs. Maybe you might need a certification or some type of training or something, but the pay might be good enough where it might be worth it as opposed to just driving for Uber and Lyft. There's a lot of tricky things with it. The last con I want to say, in my opinion, the biggest three, like I said, the price, the independent contractor aspect, overall really the accounting. The third, which is another big one that I think has been getting worse over time, and in some ways maybe a little bit better, and that is just the overall legal aspects. And what I mean is, remember, the more you're on the road, the more likely you are, just statistically speaking, that you are to get into an accident. That is very unfortunate, as you can imagine. This is why I always suggest to a lot of drivers, one, make sure you have a dash cam. And not only just a dash cam, and this is something that's very common now, that the dash cam not only records outside your vehicle, so like say like in front of you and everything, but inside your vehicle as well. We've probably all seen these stories. Some of them have gone viral as well, whether they're fake or not, of let's say a driver and a passenger having a dispute about something or whatever. Not only is that important, like say if something happens where, like say a passenger attacks you, like say they accuse you of something that could go into like a potential legal realm, you have that footage just in case. But also, and this is another big thing all along with the legal aspect, is deactivations. Deactivations have gotten a lot worse on Uber and Lyft, and typically the companies will favor the passenger, not the driver. So let's say you get into an argument with a passenger, they get out and they make up some BS about you as a driver. Your account could be frozen for a couple weeks as they investigate what happened. And even if they come back and they say, oh, you know what? Yeah, sorry, we realized that actually the passenger was kind of making it up and blah, blah, blah. We realized you're right. We still missed out on 2 weeks of work. And yeah, it's part-time. Yeah, maybe you have other stuff going on or whatever. And that's still 2 weeks of part-time work you have to miss out on. And I mean, who knows? Like say you're in college and you're driving for Uber and Lyft, and you're driving part-time, not because you necessarily want to, but because you have to. You're like, I have to make money because I'm in college and I'm broke, but I have all these classes going on and everything, so the only way I can get any money is driving part-time for Uber and Lyft. That can be a huge hit. So deactivation's another big issue. The second big thing I will say, going back to the legal aspects, is not only when it comes to having a dash cam to protect yourself, but also rideshare insurance. It does depend on your policy and everything, but you want to look at, you're typically looking at about $6 to about $20-ish extra a month. So it really isn't that much more. And I will say, even if you're driving part-time, you're like, well, Mark, I'm not driving full-time, I'm not racking up the miles and everything. In my opinion, it's still worth it, because the last thing you want, and this does happen more than you think, you get into an accident or like say something happens, even if it's not your fault, you tell your insurance company like, yeah, I was driving for Uber and Lyft and this happened. And they're like, whoa, we didn't know you were driving for Uber and Lyft. We're not going to cover you. Like, we didn't know this. And now you're in this weird kind of situation where you're like, shoot, now I'm liable or whatever. And my insurance company, and not surprisingly, insurance companies will do and say whatever they can to come up with an excuse to not cover you. And in some cases, I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but in some cases they do have a point. If they're like, well, if you're being a rideshare driver and we didn't know that, we kind of feel a bit left out, so to speak, that you didn't tell us up front. Just do it. Talk to your insurance company. Maybe even inquire to say, hey, I'm considering driving. I'm just curious how much extra is rideshare insurance or whatever. Typically, like I said, it's not too much more expensive and it's well worth it. You know, but overall, again, when it comes to the cons, I think the biggest one, even on the legal aspect, is really the money, right? Let's be honest. You're watching this video because you're curious if you can make a lot of money driving for Uber and Lyft. The biggest thing overall, and this is what I say to everyone, is just to test the waters. Because the reason why is it depends on your location. And it also depends on when you can drive. If, let's say, you have a schedule where you're like, all right, I can't drive during Friday and Saturday nights because, let's say, you have work. And let's say you have some work during the week. So basically, you can only drive, and I'm making this up. Let's say you can only drive Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. To me, that's not worth it. Even if, let's say, you live in a great area and all these kind of things, you might not make that much money because those are really non-peak hours or off hours to drive. However, to add a whole curveball into all of this, delivery driving is a great potential option in that case. I do have a link listed below in the description to a video I did about delivery driving versus rideshare driving. But overall, those hours, which I find very surprising, and a lot of delivery drivers have told me this, the kind of lunch rush, so about 10:30 to about 1 or 2:30, right? Can sometimes pay more, and typically do pay more than, let's say, a Friday or Saturday night. I gotta be honest, I thought that would have been the opposite. I thought people, like, say, on a Friday night would be, you know, drunk and want junk food, or here in LA or other places might be super high and get the munchies and order food. I guess during the lunch rush, that's when you can make a lot of money. So that's something you can look at as well as, and again, whole other subject, for a whole other video. You can watch it listed below in the description. But delivery driving is also a very viable, good option as well. I will say it depends on the person. For me personally, I did try delivery driving. I hated it. I like the idea of being a driver where I could talk to people, I have fun. I hated doing Uber Eats and delivery driving. However, I know other people who are the opposite. They're like, Mark, I love doing it. I don't have to deal with people. I can kind of put in my headphones or play, like, say, a podcast in my car. I can listen to it. I can drive around. I don't have to deal with people. My car doesn't have to be spotless, super clean. If it's a little messy, who cares? Because no one's getting in it, etc., etc. And one huge kind of pro tip that not a lot of people know is when you sign up for Uber, it automatically also signs you up for Uber Eats. And on the Uber dashboard, you can select, do I want to do Uber rides, Uber Eats rides, or a combination of the two? As you can imagine, I feel like for most people, they typically pick one or the other. It is kind of weird, I feel like, being like, all right, let me do a bunch of rideshare drives, so to speak, or rides or whatever. Then do Uber Eats or whatever. But what's good about that is if, let's say you don't know, let's say you're like, all right, I want to drive part-time, I'm going to sign up for Uber and Lyft, and as a huge pro tip I suggest you do, sign up with both apps, because that way you get the best of both worlds. Depending on your location, Lyft might pay more, Uber might pay more. And in addition to, they both have different bonuses. That's one of the best ways to make a ton of money driving. And the link listed below in the description, I have a video I did talking about 25 tips for new drivers. Bunch of tips in there to make a lot of money, and one of the biggest ones is sign up with both apps. The bonuses, each one pays a little bit different, etc., etc. This is a great way to make a lot of money. So if you sign up with both, Lyft is just Lyft, but Uber's Uber and Uber Eats. And that's a great way to make a lot of money and also have another potential option in case Uber doesn't pay as much as you want. Overall, though, I gotta say, just in general, I think being a part-time driver is the way to go. Personally, I have to be honest, to kind of finish off this video, I don't like driving full-time. I'm gonna be blunt. I will do a video similar to this, maybe in a few days or something, talking about what is it like being a full-time driver. For me, I hated driving full-time. I think part-time is the way to go. Just overall, compared to every other job out there, I gotta say, being an Uber and Lyft driver, and I might as well say a delivery driver as well, is the best part-time option and side gig for anybody's lifestyle.